The great English philosopher John Locke argued that humans have natural rights to life, liberty, and property. It is human nature to live in a society where all of their desires and rights are fulfilled. Humans want to feel free of oppression by a power greater than themselves. Humans want to live in a world they feel significant in and to be able to control their own destinies. All too many times, empires consisting of vast land masses and people do not fulfill these natural rights, angering and betraying its own citizens. When this happens, humans and human nature defeat any army or government, no matter the size. Now, what if I told you that with every empire, the same flaws arise? What if I told you that looking at the fall of past empires could predict the fall of a future one?
One major empire that collapsed was Napoleon Bonaparte's French Empire. France, a country weakened by an era revolution that overthrew the corrupt aristocracy, was ruled by a five-person directory. Napoleon rose to power during the French Revolution, and he soared through the ranks of the military, where he sought political power and made himself emperor, overthrowing the directory in the process. Once a prominent military and political leader of France, his arrogance and his corrupt ideals led to the overall deterioration of the First French Empire. Napoleon ruled over an extremely large empire consisting of modern-day Belgium, Netherlands, Croatia, and other European countries. Even though he had a large amount of land and power, many of the countries he conquered were unhappy with his decision of putting his family on the thrones of their respective nations, including Italy and Spain. These conquered countries were known as dependent states. This caused most of these states to unite and revolt against a new common enemy, Napoleon, and a major example of this was the revolt in Russia. As Russia began to revolt, Napoleon wanted to maintain control in the Mediterranean, and he decided to invade. However, the combination of Russia's scorched earth policy of burning their own crops and his overestimation of his army became fatal to his success. The invasion of Russia became Napoleon's worst decision ever, as many of his troops perished in the bitter Russian winter. This defeat took out most of his strongest army and became a crucial factor in his total defeat at the Battle of Waterloo at the hands of the Duke of Wellington. Napoleon was exiled from France, and the First French Empire had collapsed into nothingness.
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender!
Analogous to Napoleon's reign, the same came to the once distinguished British Empire. Once again, history shows parallels between important events, and the British Empire's vanity and corrupt decisions resulted in the eradication of its once prominent landholdings. Great Britain was ruled by a constitutional monarchy, meaning that they were ruled by a king or queen whose power is constrained by a constitution. At the time, the British Empire consisted of many different countries and territories across the globe. They controlled Canada, Egypt, India, Australia, and many more. Over time, the British would find that their colonies were difficult to control, and the British Empire would begin to fall apart. The British felt that it was their duty to sophisticate the uncivilized people in Africa, known as white man's burden. The phrase was created by a poet named Richard Kipling, and it implied for white men to enlighten people of color. This shows that they believed that they were better than many of the countries under their control. Also, the British made it clear that they wanted complete authority over their colonies. The British Parliament contained no members from the colonies, but only contained members from the mother country. The Parliament ran the country according to the needs of Britain, and they disregarded the needs of their controlled territories. This was a corrupt way to run their government, and the British were not able to find much success in this method. Soon, many countries saw this as an opportunity to rebel against British power. A key example of this was present in India. Soldiers in India working for the British East India Company started to revolt, and this caused tension in British rule over their colonies. Led by Gandhi, Indians practiced civil disobedience to show their disapproval of the British. Another example of this is in Kenya. The people of Kenya were unhappy with the redistribution of land since they had received little reimbursement for giving up their land to white settlers. Led by Pan-African beliefs of thinkers like W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey, Africans were able to be educated of their cultural heritage, and they stressed the need for unity. These factors all contributed to the conquered territories gaining their independence, and this marks the end of the British Empire.
The same pattern repeats itself when it is applied to the Soviet Union. These demonstrations of arrogance, corruption, and uprising appear and contribute to the antithesis of a successful country. The USSR consisted of 15 different republics, some of them being Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, and Lithuania. A particular party, the Bolsheviks, took over the government in 1917 and applied the policy of communism. Under the leadership of Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin, communism would prove to be fatal to the success of the USSR. The Soviet Union wanted to become a powerhouse on the world stage. In order to do so, they had to spend extremely large amounts of money on their military and the arms race. They spent a huge amount of $128 billion in 1989. However, their economy began to suffer because of these investments, and this showed their desire to be better than many of their surrounding countries. Another contribution to the country's decline was the fact that many of the citizens were living in poverty due to their communist form of government. All of the citizens suffered due to communism, and they experienced famine and poor living conditions. Money within the country was supposed to be evenly distributed, but it really ended up with the government officials. This shows how poorly the economy was being handled and that their government was not strong. In the USSR, there are many different ethnicities, and this factor caused lots of tension within the country. These tensions caused several of the Soviet countries to begin separatist movements and split from their alliance. There are several important revolutions, including the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, as well as the Baltic states declaring independence from Moscow. This social divide influenced other countries within the USSR to separate, such as Belarus and Ukraine. With a poorly ruled government and the divisions of its internal countries, the Soviet Union was finished. Through much deliberation by the means of looking at the past declines of nations and empires, China, one of the world's oldest nations, could be the next major country to fall. The pattern of arrogance, favoritism or corruption, and uprising all present itself in this ancient Asian empire. China is ruled by President Xi Jinping in an authoritarian system. Their economy is composed of many industrial facets, and this leaves their citizens with little luxury. China could also fall due to their spending on their military. China is second among all other nations in military spending, allocating $175 billion to it in 2018. Rather than spending money on pressing issues such as pollution in their country, the Chinese government chooses to make their military one of the strongest in the world. The People's Republic of China has run under a communist regime since World War II. Under the system, a select few families and individuals remain in power for generations upon generations. The position of the President of China gets to remain in office for life. This unjust system leaves average citizens out of possible positions of power and change, restricting their futures. If public awareness of this issue is allowed to grow, it could put China in a very precarious position. Finally, this republic could also fall due to their increasingly nationalistic movements growing within Chinese minorities. Minorities such as the Tibetans and the Uyghurs have seen an increase in their desire to have separate states for themselves. Rather than discussing these social issues peacefully, the Chinese government ruthlessly continues to quiet these groups. China is made up of over 1 billion people, and if the people look at these issues and see the government as unjust, they will seek serious change. Over 10 Chinese dynasties have fallen in the past, and this could be no different.